Man, my stinger did not work again. That is awful. Well, guys, thank you for joining me on my live stream today. I'm talking about a book giveaway that I'm doing for patrons. Basically, I want to get to 100% support, and I'm very, very close. I want to give you guys an update on how close I am. But I wanted to give you guys a treat today for today's live stream. So I'm joined by Dr. Braxton Hunter, actually. So if you don't know who he is, I want you to, just check the link in the description. I've actually linked his YouTube channel. So make sure to go over to his channel and subscribe. What sort of put him on the map? And he's here. You can talk, Braxton. You can say hi to everybody if you want.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Cameron.
Yeah, this was so last minute, like 30 minutes before the live stream. I was like, why don't I invite my friend Braxton on to talk about some of these books and just to shoot the breeze, if that's the right way to say that expression. So Braxton, you kind of came onto the scene with your debate with Matt Dillahunty, right? And that's actually how I found out about you. And then I started to check out some of your videos, and it was really good quality stuff. Like you're also, you've got a PhD, so you know what you're doing, and you're also a professor. You run a ministry, you run an entire school. So take about 60 seconds and just tell the audience kind of who you are and what you do. This isn't an interview, by the way. I'm not interviewing him. He's just here. But if you don't know who he is, we might as well introduce him. So go ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So our school is Trinity College of the Bible and Theological Seminary, and we're an online distance learning school that is non-denominational, but theologically more conservative, and we major on apologetics and evangelism. So I'd love for anyone who's interested to check out our school at trinitysem.edu, trinitysem.edu. But so I've been into apologetics for years. I had an evangelistic ministry for a long time, traveling and speaking at churches and conferences and evangelistic events, and I found that apologetics was really helpful for that. So I started studying apologetics and got a degree in apologetics, and had a few debates. I've had debates on theological issues with other believers too, but I've had a couple of 2 or 3 debates with skeptics, but the one with Matt Dillahunty from this past February at Baylor University has gotten the most attention. And really, Cameron, I credit you with some of the limited amount of success that I've had, because Cameron told me that my graphic design and basic look of the channel was just atrocious, and helped me, gave me a lot of input. It's still not where he'd like it to be. So, but I worked that stuff out, and you and Mike Winger and John McRae and others have given me a lot of great advice to help get the channel where it should be. And so I've just really been experiencing a lot of God's blessing in this arena, because I think this arena is really important. And I know you only gave me 60 seconds, so I'll just say this, that I think where a lot of apologists focus on, more of the, professors and popularizers out there, YouTube is a little bit different. And in fact, when people go to look for information on how to fix their washing machine or whether or not there's a God, they go to YouTube. And so I found YouTube to be a really important place to be presenting Christian ideas, thoughtful Christian ideas. And I guess that's why that our two channels kind of get along so well.
Yeah, and you and I get along so well. I mean, we've had several conversations, even in the series that I did with Rationality Rules. I remember calling you one time to just throw out some of the ideas that I was having. And so it was a great conversation. I mean, you're obviously a professional. That's what I love doing is interacting with professionals. So if you want to learn more about Braxton, go check out his channel. It's called Trinity Radio right now. You change the name like every 5 days. So right now it's called Trinity Radio.
It's youtube.com/Braxton Hunter. Yeah.
Yeah, it's real easy to find. If you search Braxton Hunter, or if you just look in the description of the video, you can find the link. It's actually right beneath all of the books that I have listed out, every single book that we're giving away today. Not today, but we are giving away some books. And that's actually, let's talk about the books. So the books, actually there's 13 books. I've marketed it as like I'm giving away 12 books because I'm 12% away from 100% to go full-time at this ministry. And I'm actually going to give you guys an update on where we are, because in the past 24 hours, it's actually jumped quite a bit, because I launched it on Patreon, the giveaway and everything. So if you want to sign up, let me just tell you how to do that first. So if you want to sign up and enter to do this giveaway, I'm giving away 12 books to one person, and I'm giving away 1 book to the runner-up. And we're going to look at all these books in just a minute. But if you want to enter, then all you've got to do is head over to my Patreon. That's patreon.com/capturingchristianity. and sign up to become a patron. So you can do $5 a month, $10 a month, $25, $50, $100, $150, however much you want to do per month. Whatever you do, you're going to automatically be entered in to win 12 books or the runner-up prize, which is this cool book that we'll talk about in a minute. And if you're already an existing patron and you want to enter, then all you've got to do is up your patronage. And again, the point of this is to get to 100% funding. I did another video where I explained sort of why I'm doing this transition at this point. And so if you want to watch that, I didn't link it in the description of the video, but I did an update recently. And so I think that God is calling me to do this ministry full time. Well, let's talk about the books. Let's start with the runner-up book, which is one of my favorites. It's one of the books that I bought when I was just getting into apologetics. It's the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology. Let's see if my camera will. There we go. The Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology, edited by William Lane Craig and J.P. Moreland. So, Braxton, tell me about your experience with this book, because this is one of the books that you've read of the collection here. So, tell me your experience with this book.
Yeah, well, I love that book. One of the reasons is because when I first got into Christian apologetics and discovered William Lane Craig, and I just started devouring him and devouring a lot of the philosophically minded guys who focused on theistic arguments and things like that. And so, it's not really an entry level type book, I don't think. I think you need to have a little bit of awareness of what's going on to really appreciate that book. And so I started out with, I don't know, something. I think Reasonable Faith came along pretty quickly, and then I moved on up to that book and Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview, and also Craig and Moreland. And so that book helped to clarify for me a lot of the concepts.
Let me show you guys some of this, if it can focus here. I don't know if it's going to be able to. You may be able to see this. Let me actually put it up on the full screen here. Not to cut you off, but I'm just emphasizing one of the points you made, is that this book is extreme, that is logical notation. If you don't know what any of those symbols mean, then yeah, to get through some of this book, you need to have some kind of training in philosophy, which is what he's kind of saying, is that this is a little bit more of an advanced book.
Yeah, one of the really helpful things, Apologetics 315, which is run by Kurt Jarris now, I think is a mutual friend, and they have had for a long time, this could be helpful for people, a breakdown of books that are good for beginners, books that are good for intermediate level apologists, and advanced, people that are, you've been studying this for a long time. And I think that's at least in the intermediate, if not the advanced category, but it will certainly help you flesh out some of the stuff that you would get. One of the things that frustrates me, I think, Cameron, about YouTube, and one of the things that your channel specifically tries to address, is we're trying to move the conversation beyond the kind of surface level apologetic stuff that you get and the discussions that happen between atheists and Christians, in Facebook comments or YouTube comment streams. We're trying to take it to the next level. How do we go further? That's why you'll have guys like Rasmussen on here and try to push it further. And that book is a good example of, if you watch a lot of YouTube and get all of your intellectual philosophy of religion type content there, that's wonderful. I love that. We all have YouTube channels here, but that book would be a good place to let's go deeper. Let's move past what you get on YouTube for the most part.
Yeah, and this is some of the deepest natural theology and apologetic stuff that you can get in this book. And I mean, in this book also, what's great about this is that it completely shatters this stereotype that Christianity is not, an intellectual endeavor. If you read any of this book, then you're going to see pretty quickly, and I mean, all these guys are Christians that wrote these chapters in here. You're going to notice pretty quickly that there's a lot of intellectualism that can be attained in Christianity. Let me just read some of the chapters here. So the first one is about the project of natural theology. The second one is one of my favorite chapters, the Leibnizian cosmological argument by Alexander Pruss. And that one is just his version of the contingency argument, which, as many of you know, is my favorite argument for God. The next one is the Kalam cosmological argument by William Lane Craig and James D. Sinclair. The teleological argument, the Finetuning argument for the universe by Robin Collins. The argument from consciousness by J.P. Moreland. The argument from reason, Victor Raper. I hope I said that right. Do you know who that guy is? Raper?
No.
R-E-P-P-E-R-T.
Raper. Yeah, that's fine.
Rapert. Yeah. Rapert. The moral argument by Mark D. Linville. He's actually working on a book project with another philosopher on the moral argument right now. So that I think it's like a debate book. But anyway, so that chapter is really good. The Argument from Evil, Stuart Goetz. The Argument from Religious Experience, Kai-Man Kwan. The Argument from, the Ontological Argument, Robert E. Madel. And that one is actually that's the one that I showed you with all the logical notation. It's incredibly difficult to get through, especially if you don't have any training there. And then the last one is The Argument from Miracles, A Cumulative Case for the Resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth by Timothy McGrew and Lydia McGrew. So this is what the runner-up is going to get. If you don't win all 12, then you can still win this beautiful, thick book. It's amazing. All right, so let's move on to
Cameron, that should be on anyone's shelf. But one question I would have for you is, I've heard you say before that the Leibnizian contingency argument is your favorite, and I've wondered, is the reason that it's your favorite because it kind of bypasses some of the problems that that you would have to argue through with something like the Kalam cosmological argument?
Some of that, yeah. So there's a few reasons. So one of them is that because you don't have to argue that the universe began to exist, then you can sort of bypass the need to do that. Now, I think there are good reasons to think the universe began to exist. One of my recent interviews with Dr. Rob Koons, we talked about this sort of paradox that happens, which basically forces you to accept something called causal finitism, which is the idea that the past there can't be an infinite chain of causes into the past. So I think there are good reasons to accept a beginning of the universe, but the contingency argument sort of avoids that. You don't have to do that. Now, that's one reason, but another reason is that I think stage 2 arguments are a little bit stronger. When it comes to the contingency argument, you can go sort of directly to a perfect being with the argument from contingency that you can't really do with the Kalam. And maybe there's different approaches. I mean, to both of these arguments, there's different types of Kalam arguments. There's different type of stage 2 arguments for each the Kalam and the contingency argument. I know I'm using a lot of technical jargon right now, but those are just some of the reasons. You asked me a question, so I had to answer it. Did you have a follow-up?
I think you're right, and I know you want to get to the next book, but yeah, I would say people know that have watched my channel that my favorite is the Kalam, but when somebody raises, say, the concern that, well, this is more technical jargon, but if a B theory of time is true, then that allows people to escape this problem of an infinite past that you talked about. But the contingency argument does kind of bypass that, so it gets right to the point. So I can see why someone would appreciate that.
Yeah, and Dr. Josh Rasmussen is a big part of why I think that argument is the best argument, because I started to engage his work, and I'm not sure exactly what sort of spawned that, actually. As I'm trying to think back, I can't think of any one particular thing that caused me to really look into his work. By the way, and I'll talk about this at sort of the end once we get to the list through the list of these books. I am interviewing Dr. Josh Rasmussen on his book that's included in the 12. I'm interviewing him about his book and sort of continuing the marketing here with these 12 books and trying to get to the 100%. I'm interviewing him about his book on Thursday, so we'll be able to talk about that and sort of explore some of the reasons why I think that the contingency is the best. All right, don't cut me off again. Here's the next one. The next one is Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview. And this one, let me see if I can get it in focus here. Come on, camera. There we go.
With a cool new cover.
The cool new cover. Yeah, this is actually the second edition. The second edition, this is another incredibly thick book. This edition, I'm not sure exactly what the editions were from the first edition. I have the first edition hardback. Hardback? What is it called? Hardcover. I have the first edition hardcover, and then the second edition I have on my Kindle. So this one, this is the first book of the 12 that you can win if you sign up to become a patron. And so this one is incredible because it talks a lot about, well, it gives you a sort of basis for doing philosophy as a Christian, and there's tons of different things that it covers. So there's epistemology, metaphysics, philosophy of science, ethics, philosophy of religion, and philosophical theology. So there's just a ton of different things, and it looks like it's 600 pages long. So it's...
Well, I don't know if the new one still has this, but the edition that I have begins in the introduction talking about, with this great appeal, talking about at the opening of the Billy Graham Museum or Library or whatever, and some public official got up and was talking about how, we at some point it was like we had won America for Jesus, not literally, but in the sense that it had at some point become a very Christianized nation. We never won their minds, and how by now we should have won the minds of America if every evangelical Christian, if every believer were aware of these simple philosophical principles, some of the basic apologetics that we're used to. There's more than enough of a force that we should have won America to Christ, not just in terms of an existential, experiential relationship with him, but won their minds to him such that they would be able to engage on these matters. And I thought that was really powerful. Of course, you go right from there into like, what is modus tollens and all these kind of formulations in the first sections, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it does talk about logic, I think, pretty soon here. So if you wanted to read that chapter on Madel, on the ontological argument, you could read some of this section, what is philosophy, argumentation, and logic, and that's the part where they talk about propositional logic and some of the symbols and stuff that you see. Now, I think in the ontological argument, you have, or at least Madel's version, the one that he writes for the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology. I think he's like kind of advanced stuff. Like you're going to have to probably pick up a book on logic in order to sort of understand that. This is an introduction. So, but it's still an amazing book. There's tons and tons of great information in here. The section on epistemology, I think I've read a couple times, and it's just super, super good. So the next book on the list is Understanding Scientific Theories of Origins. Let's see if we can get it in focus here. So this book is probably one of the most beautiful books I've ever seen in my life. The graphic design, the people that designed this is just, it's incredible. Let me see if I can just pull up, well, I mean, I can just show you this here. Not that a lot of people are going to care about this kind of stuff, but just the graphics, they're beautiful. It's amazing. And it's, so this is actually kind of like a textbook. This is what I think, colleges and Bible seminaries and everything, I think they might use this book in order to, I don't know, maybe they'll teach a class on science and theology and the sort of intersections of it. But I've only read one chapter of this book, and it was the chapter on the flood, but I loved it. It was super, super good. And so let me tell you a little of the backstory on why we chose these 12 books. So I was working with the patron who's actually an advisory board member. I have an advisory board, and I talk to them about big decisions that I have with the ministry. And so he partnered with me. He's the one who basically sponsored all of these books that we could give away. And he was, he's been part of trying to, he was a big part of selecting the books. And that's why some of these books I haven't read, I didn't even know existed. And he's the one that chose them. So I can't talk a whole lot about them. But this is a book that I chose because I just think it's a great book to have on your bookshelf. There's so many different interesting topics here. It even talks about abiogenesis and just a lot of other cool stuff. It's just beautiful. Beautiful book. Did you have anything to add here on this one?
No, scientific apologetics isn't something that's really my strong suit, but you're right. It would definitely look good on a bookshelf. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Looks beautiful. All right. Now let's get to a book that you have read, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. And this is a book I have not read. So I actually need to buy this one. But the reason why I wanted to include this, come on, focus. It's trying to focus on my face because it's has like auto face detection. Jesus and the Eyewitnesses. This is a book. The reason why I chose this book is because I've heard so much about it. I've heard it's like a classic. But let me just go ahead and read you N.T. Wright's endorsement on the back of this book. He said, "The question of whether the Gospels are based on eyewitness accounts has long been controversial. Richard Bauckham, in a characteristic tour de force, draws on his unparalleled knowledge of the world of the first Christians to argue not only that the Gospels do indeed contain eyewitness testimony, but that their first readers would certainly have recognized them as such. This book is a remarkable piece of detective work, resulting in a fresh and vivid approach to dozens, perhaps hundreds of well-known problems and passages." So that's the reason why I wanted to include this, because it's sort of a classic at this point for apologetics and studying the reasons why there are eyewitness accounts and evidence in the New Testament. So what were your thoughts as you read this book?
Oh, this is one that I can't say enough good things about. That is worth the whole ball of wax. I had read that a long time ago, but I read it in preparation for the Dillahunty debate and made notes. I've got a notebook full of Bauckham and Van Voorst and others that are kind of in the vein of defending the historicity of Jesus and the resurrection, all that. The great thing about that is he goes into why it is reasonable to believe, and I don't want to overstate it, but why it's reasonable to believe that we do have eyewitness testimony here. Typically, you'll hear skeptics say something like, this wasn't written by eyewitnesses and we have no idea who wrote it. Well, this is an exaggeration. Is it technically true that we don't have like Cartesian certainty about who wrote these books? Yeah, that's probably true, but that doesn't mean we have no idea who wrote them. For instance, one of the great things that Bauckham brings out here is he says, all right, if the Gospels are written in Greco-Roman biography, which the majority of scholars believe that they're either written in Greco-Roman biography or something that has striking affinities with Greco-Roman biography. One of the things that we know some people who wrote in that genre used some of the time was this device called the inclusio. And what the and Bauckham spends a lot of time on this. And what the inclusio is he says, okay, if he bookends a pericope of a text or a book itself, like with the Gospel of Mark is bookended with Peter, if he bookends a section or a book itself with a particular person, particularly if that person isn't necessarily all that important to a given story, then this can be a way that those authors cite their sources, so that this is who gave me this information. And another way that this happens in the Gospels is the Gospels give you the 12, and Acts gives you the 12, even if a particular disciple isn't that important to a particular gospel or doesn't show up a whole lot. It's because Bauckham argues he's giving you the tradents of this tradition, so that going forward, it's not an oral tradition in the sense that we often hear atheists characterize it, where it develops like a fishtail. No, it's more of an oral history that is somewhat solidified by these gospel tradents, these guarantors of the tradition, like Paul and like Peter and like the 12. So it's a really powerful case. And if you're the kind of person who wants to argue for the validity of the Gospels, that is a must read.
Yeah, so let me just sort of read the inside cover here, and just to give you a sort of overview, and then we'll move on to the next one. This critically acclaimed work argues that the four Gospels are based on the eyewitness testimony of those who personally knew Jesus. Noted New Testament scholar Richard Bauckham challenges the prevailing assumption that the stories about Jesus circulated as, quote, anonymous community traditions, end quote, asserting instead that they were transmitted in the names of the original eyewitnesses. To drive this point home, Bauckham draws on internal literary evidence, the use of personal names in first-century Jewish Palestine, and recent developments in the understanding of oral tradition. Jesus and the Eyewitnesses also taps into the rich resources of modern study of memory, especially in cognitive psychology, refuting the conclusions of the form critics and calling New Testament scholarship to make a clean break from that long dominant tradition. So that's all I read of that, but it's an incredible book. And by the way, if you don't win, you probably should still be interested in these books and probably pick them up. So I've linked all 12 of these, well, really 13 of these books, in the link in the description. So just check the description if you want to get the direct link to Amazon and purchase it that way. All right, let's move on to the next one. And this is another book that I'm actually going to be interviewing the author on Monday. This one is called A Fortunate Universe it's actually by Geraint Lewis and Luke Barnes. So Luke Barnes is a Christian. Geraint Lewis is an agnostic, I believe. He's an agnostic cosmologist. And so they co-wrote this book together. It's about the fine-tuning argument. But really what they did was the majority of the book is on the fine-tuning evidence that the universe is fine-tuned. And so that's what I'll be interviewing Dr. Barnes about on Monday, is about the evidence that the universe is fine-tuned, because after that point, then you can start to open the question or ask the question, well, why is the universe life-permitting if this fine-tuning exists? And so that's what we'll be talking about. But just a little about this book. Well, I've already explained sort of the majority of the book is about the fine-tuning evidence, which is actually really accessible. Like the way that they write is it's actually really funny and engaging, and I don't want to call it polemical, but it's very funny. It's very engaging, very, very easy to read. And they have a really interesting chapter, which I think is worth the entire book, where they basically have a conversation between Luke and Geraint about the implications of fine-tuning. And so obviously Luke is coming from a Christian perspective. He thinks this is evidence for design. He thinks it's evidence for Christianity and or theism. And Geraint just sort of hits back and sort of raises a lot of the common objections that you see to the fine-tuning argument. So that chapter alone, I think, is worth the entire book. It's just that good. And again, I'll be interviewing him on Monday. So if you want to learn more about that and just hear a conversation with the author, then check me out on Monday. Did you have anything else to add on that one?
Nope. I think you covered it. I'll have to read that book. So are you having a conversation with the Christian or the agnostic guy?
The Christian, Luke Barnes. Yeah, I've had him on my show actually before.
Luke Barnes, yeah.
Luke Barnes. He did a dialogue with Alex Malpass, and they talked about the fine-tuning argument, which was, after it ended, I was sitting there thinking, this is probably the best discussion I've ever heard on the argument from fine-tuning. And I'm not just talking about myself here. They were the ones who were doing the dialogue. All I did was facilitate it. And it was one of my favorite discussions I've heard on it. It was amazing. Alex Malpass he's an atheist, but he's great. Anyways. So the next book is called, and this is a book that I did not choose and I don't know anything about. It's called Confronting Christianity. And, well, I guess I can go ahead and read the endorsement by John Lennox on the back. Compelling reading, not only because of its intellectual rigor and the fact that it is beautifully written, but also because of its honest, empathic humanity. Empathetic, there we go, humanity. Readers will find themselves expertly guided on a journey that involves them not only in confronting Christianity, but also in confronting themselves, their worldviews, hopes, fears, failures, and search for identity and satisfaction. And so what she does, Rebecca McLaughlin, she said the subtitle is 12 Hard Questions for the World's Largest Religion. And so I can at least read for you the 12 questions, the hard questions that she addresses in this book. The first one is, aren't we better off without religion? Second one, doesn't Christianity crush diversity? Third, how can you say that there's only one true faith? Fourth, doesn't religion hinder morality? Fifth, doesn't religion cause violence? Sixth, how can you take the Bible literally? Seventh, hasn't science disproved Christianity? Eighth, doesn't Christianity denigrate women? Number 9, isn't Christianity homophobic? 10, doesn't the Bible condone slavery? 11, how could a loving God allow so much suffering? 12, how could a loving God send people to hell? So, this looks like a pretty interesting book. I kind of want to read it myself. I always like to, even these more basic questions that, like, you look into these as you first start looking into apologetics, but I like to see different people's perspectives on how they answer this. So I think this would be a great book for anybody, not just newbies who are just getting into apologetics. I think this would be a great book for anyone.
Yeah, and let's face it, those are often the questions that you hear more than the bigger, more rigorous questions about divine hiddenness and the problem of evil, which the problem of evil was mentioned there, but these more, basic conversational criticisms that you hear. So that probably actually has some value, a different angle with the popular level more than some of these heavier books like Philosophical Foundations. Yeah,
so if you're just joining me, let me give you a quick rundown of what's happening here. So I'm giving 12 books away, really 13. 12 books. I'm going through all 12 right now. If you want to see all 12, check the link in the description. And so we're going through each book one by one to just say a little bit about each one of them. And if you want to enter into the giveaway and win all 12 books, then check the link in the description. Basically, all you got to do is become a supporter on Patreon. So just check for the link in the description. All right, let's look at the next book, Evangelism in a Skeptical World by Sam Chan, who is a PhD at... Come on, focus. It's not going to do it. It's not going to do it, Braxton. There it is. All right, Sam Chan, Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. He's a public evangelist with City Bible Forum in Sydney, Australia. Well, I guess, have you read this one? I don't think you have.
I have not read it. I should have, but I haven't. He's at the wrong Trinity.
He's at the wrong Trinity. It looks like it's a pretty good book on evangelism, and he talks about it in a skeptical world. I also like how I was just sort of thumbing through this earlier, and I like how he sort of addresses what to do with postmodernism, how to evangelize in a postmodern society. Evangelism to Postmoderns is chapter 4. So I can just read sort of some of the back here. Many of the principles and methods of evangelism from the 20th century no longer work effectively today. We need new methods to communicate the timeless message of the gospel in culturally relevant ways. Combining the theological and biblical insights of classic evangelistic training with the latest insights on contextualization, cultural hermeneutics, and storytelling, author Sam Chan illuminates every chapter of Evangelism in a Skeptical World with real-world examples drawn from the more than 20 years of experience in evangelistic ministry. So, looks like a really good book. If you're interested in evangelism, check this one out.
Yeah, and it should be pointed out that is, over the past several years, we've been experiencing kind of a golden age of apologetics, at least in terms of resources on offer. But much of it has just been, here, look at all these cool arguments and stuff. But there's been a dearth of resources that are like, here's how you can use it to reach people for Christ. And so it's good to have one. And that's what I wrote my dissertation on, was evangelism and apologetics. So, when he says that like the older tactics don't work, one of the old ways we did it, there used to be this program called the Faith Soul Winning Program, but it's the same thing as like evangelism explosion. These were all old things from the late 90s or before. And the key question they wanted you to get to was, in your personal opinion, what do you understand it takes for a person to go to heaven? Well, think about what that entails. The person believes in heaven. The person basically intellectually gives assent to the Christian message. But that's all taking a lot for granted that we can't take for granted in the culture anymore. So a book like Chan's would be very helpful for that. So I think it's important for people not just to line their bookshelves with the theoretical stuff, but the practical stuff like that one. And I think we often overlook that as apologetics geeks.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. You've got to sort of balance it out. It can't all be just head stuff. You've got to get the practical side of things too. All right, so this one is The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus by Gary Habermas and Michael Licona. So what's interesting about this one, as I was looking through it, is it's extremely dated, and you can tell that because it includes a CD. Extremely dated. This is way too old. I don't know why I bought this one. Just kidding. So the reason why this one was included is because, well, first of all, I've interviewed Dr. Gary Habermas, and we talked about the resurrection. So I wanted to include a book from someone who I interviewed, and that's part of the reason. But it's also sort of a classic at this point on the evidence for the resurrection. So this is one that I haven't read either. Have you read this one? I'm sure you have.
I have read it, but it's been a long time ago. I thought about reading that again when I was doing preparation for the Dillahunty debate, but I just read Licona's massive work on the resurrection instead and felt like I'd get all of that and more, although that's not entirely true. I think that book is probably better for someone who wants to learn how to use the minimal facts type of approach with friends and family and everyday people, and just to learn the case for themselves. I think it's good for that. If someone wants to go further, like we were talking about the beginner versus intermediate type stuff, that might be more of an intermediate. A beginner might be the case for Christ, and an intermediate might be something like that. And then a more advanced thing would be like Kona's big resurrection book. But that is a powerful book. Everyone needs to have that book just because, again, it kind of combines the practical with the theoretical in that they're going to give you ways to remember this stuff for personal evangelism.
Yep. All right, let's move on to the next book. Next one is one of my favorites, Knowledge and Christian Belief by Alvin Plantinga. See if we can get it in focus there. Yeah, so I'm a big Reformed epistemologist. I think that you don't have to have arguments and evidence. Well, really, not necessarily evidence, but I think that you don't have to have arguments in order to be rational and warranted and justified in your belief in Christianity. And so this is an abridged version, so you can see how thin it is. It's a real easy to read, smaller, thinner version of another book that Alvin Plantinga wrote called Warranted Christian Belief. And in that book, he argues, and basically he argues the same thing in this book, just in less words, that we don't have to have arguments in order to have a rationally justified, warranted belief in Christianity. And so if you want to learn how all of that is possible, then check out this book. It's really super easy to read. Like I said, this one is actually a really good refresher. If you're someone who's already read Warranted Christian Belief and you kind of want a refresher on some of Alvin Plantinga's ideas, it's also a good book for that. But if you just want to learn sort of the basics of Reformed epistemology, you want to learn some of religious epistemology, some of the advancements that have happened in the last, half century or so, then this is a great book to pick up and read. And yeah, so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to include it. I was thinking Warranted Christian Belief, but this one is a little bit more accessible, easier to read for people who aren't super into epistemology like I am. So any thoughts on that book?
I admire Reformed epistemology too. You wouldn't know that really from listening to anything I do on my channel, but I agree with you that we can have kind of internal evidence that is not reached on the basis of argumentation or external evidence. And I'm a big admirer of Plantinga, and I have a section on Reformed epistemology in my dissertation that then became a book. And so I'm like you. I can't say enough good things about Alvin Plantinga.
Cool. All right, next one is The Existence of God, the second edition by Richard Swinburne. So Richard Swinburne is another guy who I've interviewed, and I did a really long interview. The first 15 minutes of it was that, and I actually have a picture of Richard Swinburne looking back at me over here on my wall. It just kind of threw me off a second. As I was saying his name, I just looked up and saw him. So I interviewed him. In about the first 15 minutes, I asked him to give an overview of his career, and he spent 15 minutes just systematically going through all the steps. So if you want to learn more about who he is, what he does, then check out my interview with him. We had a really interesting conversation. I just asked him a bunch of random questions that I at the time I asked my Facebook page. Well, I guess a lot of you guys who are watching, I asked you guys for questions, and so those questions ended up in the interview. So this book is probably one of the most popular books in the philosophy of religion, because it is, well, what Richard Swinburne has done is he's sort of taken the, I can't think of the name, Bayesian epistemology. So he's taken like the probability theory, and he's updated a lot of the arguments for God in the more contemporary probability theory, the probability calculus. And so he's basically sort of formalized everything and put it through this formula to get some like really nice figures for God's existence, basically. And he does that in a variety of ways, but it's just it's an incredible book. I think everybody should read this. And yeah, I can't say enough about it. I feel like that was a terrible overview of what this book is all about, but do you have anything to
fantastic. Add? No, just recently I read Was Jesus God by Swinburne, which I have issues with the title, Was Jesus God, but fantastic too. So yeah, Swinburne's good. That's people will enjoy that. You're giving them some real classics here.
Yeah, so number one, I'll just give you some of the chapters here so you can get an idea of what to expect with this book. Inductive Arguments, chapter 1. Number 2, The Nature of Explanation. 3, The Justification of Explanation. 4, Complete Explanation. 5, The Intrinsic Probability of Theism. 6, The Explanatory Power of Theism, General Considerations. Number 7, The Cosmological Argument. Number 8, Teleological Arguments. Number 9, Arguments from Consciousness and Morality. Number 10, The Argument from Providence. Number 11, The Problem of Evil. 12, Arguments from History and Miracles. 13, The Argument from Religious Experience. And then 14 is where he sort of formalizes everything, The Balance of Probability. So yeah, incredible book. This is a book that you want to have and you want to read. And if you want the abridged version, he actually has a sort of like Alvin Plantinga has Knowledge and Christian Belief as an abridged version of Warranted Christian Belief. If you want an abridged version of The Existence of God, then you can pick up Is There a God by Richard Swinburne. And I actually have that on my bookshelf over here. But yeah, so if you want the abridged version of that one, then you can get it too.
Yeah, that book is good. I mean, if for nothing else, his Argument from Religious Experience, which most apologists don't want to talk too much about an argument from religious experience, but he's known for it. So it's worth it for that alone. You know, that's an incredible part of the book.
So the patron, the advisory board member who was gracious enough to sort of fund this entire thing, this is another book that he chose. He's a scientist. And so this is a book that he really liked, Beyond Matter, Why Science Needs Metaphysics. And I'll just read the back here on this one. Metaphysics has traditionally been understood as reasoning beyond the reach of science, which has led to its contemptuous dismissal by the scientists and philosophers who wish to remain within scientifically provable bounds. Yet, as Roger Trigg argues, scientists as the frontiers of physics unwittingly engage in metaphysics, as they are now happy to contemplate whole universes that are in principle beyond human reach. Trigg challenges those who deny that science needs philosophical assumptions, and he even claims that the foundations of science themselves have to lie beyond science. It takes reasoning apart from what can be experienced to discover what is yet not known. Such metaphysics helps us to conceive of realities apparently beyond our grasp. So, sounds like a pretty interesting book, especially if you're interested in science and the underpinnings, the foundations of science. So, and if you want to, combat the sort of common atheist objections that you hear about science being so amazing and how you don't need metaphysics because all you need is science. Yeah, that's a book that's included in the 12. We have 2 books left. We're almost toward the end here. So this book is Why Does God Allow Evil by Clay Jones, and I've interviewed him basically on this question where he talked about his book already. So if you want to check out some of the or check out that interview, then check out the archives. And I don't have that one linked. I don't have it linked in the video, but anyway, so he addresses how many different problems of evil, because it's not just one question that he addresses. He addresses pretty much every single version of the problem of evil that you're likely to hear, not just like from philosophers or professionals, but from people on the street. Why do we suffer for Adam's sin? Why do bad things happen to good people? Are there no good people? What is the destiny of the unevangelized? How can eternal punishment be fair? Is free will worth it? Wasn't there another way? Will we have free will in heaven? Will eternity be boring? How does eternity relate to our suffering now? How does suffering relate to our eternal occupation? So it's a really interesting book. I highly recommend checking this one out, if anything, as an introduction to how Christians respond to the problem of evil. It's a great book. Also, check out my interview with him. Anything to add on this one?
Just that, first of all, I think he was a professor of my co-host Jonathan Pritchett at Biola, but I was going to say that I think that for people who are beginners in apologetics, I think that they need at least 3 things in their back pocket when they go out into the world to do evangelism. Number 1 is a good argument for God's existence. 2 is a good case for the resurrection, and 3 is a response to the problem of evil. Because I think that, obviously, if Christianity is true, you have to have God and you have to have the resurrection. But the biggest criticism I think that they're going to get from regular, everyday people is the argument from evil. So I think that should be very important, and Clay Jones is known for that.
Cool. Yeah, and I even I spoke at a conference with him last weekend. So that was not this cool. Very past weekend, but about a week and a half ago. So why does God allow evil?
And J.P. Moreland, right?
Yeah, J.P. Moreland was there.
Was it?
I wasn't a headliner or anything. I was just a breakout speaker, but it was a great experience, and it was awesome to hang out with those guys again. So, all right, last book. We're on to the last book of the collection that you can win if you sign up to become a patron. How Reason Can Lead to God. And this is another one that I'm interviewing the author about. I mentioned that at the very beginning of the stream. I'm interviewing Dr. Josh Rasmussen on Thursday, in 2 days from now. So if you want to hear more about this book and just sort of go through some of the ideas, obviously you're not going to get all the details unless you pick up and read the entire book. But this one is really, really easy to read. I'm actually reading through it right now, my own version of it. I have it over here on this side of my desk. So I'm reading through my version, and I'm doing highlighting and everything for the interview that's coming up on Thursday. So it's a really great book. It's really easy to read. It's very accessible. He's doing his best to sort of use just everyday terminology. You don't have to be a philosopher in order to read this, but it is extremely tightly argued. He's the reason why I think that the contingency argument is such a good and strong argument. I just don't really see an easy way out of the stuff that he argues. It's really cool, really incredible. I think I mentioned this in a podcast series that I did with him. We did a 4-part podcast series on the argument from contingency, and I mentioned this in that series. I think that this book, if people read it, it's going to change lives, like change a lot of people's lives. It could even potentially change the world if people find out about this. It's incredible. Have you read it?
First of all, that's like the most glowing review of a book. It's going to change the world. But the thing is, I feel terrible. As soon as you showed that book, I feel bad because he sent me a copy of that book to check out, and I haven't read it yet. But I plan to. So if you see this, Josh, I'm going to read that book, and because I haven't read read it yet, and I'm sitting in this awkward situation right now, I'll say good things about it on our podcast as well.
Yeah, well, you should. You should. It's an incredible book, and it sort of stems from his work as a professional philosopher and writing papers and submitting everything for peer review and everything. So a lot of it has been tested in the academic world, and so he's not just like spitting out stuff that hasn't been challenged already. He's very familiar with the sort of common objections that you see to these arguments, and he has workarounds. And you can't really see that unless you're engaged with the literature. You can't really see some of the moves that he's making here and why they're so interesting. For example, like one of the things that he does is talk about the fact that you can't have an explanation outside of everything that exists. Like imagine that this cup represented every single contingent thing in reality. This is actually a really good, let's see, you can't really see it, but if you want to buy this mug, you can. It's it's right there down below in the video. One of the things that he argues is that you can't have an outside explanation of everything that exists. And one of the common objections that you hear is that, well, the totality of everything is not a thing over and above the things that make it up. And so he anticipates this type of objection. He says, well, still, you don't have to say that the totality of existence, imagine this cup was just, everything was contained in this cup. You don't have to say that this cup is something over and above all the molecules or the parts, the atoms that make the cup up. You could just say, well, this plurality of things is a combination of things, and that plurality still needs an explanation. So anyways, he anticipates a lot of these objections and has ways of, well, he knows that what to argue and how to get out of it and stuff, or not how to get out of it, but how to respond.
Book. You know, like back in the day when I first started reading Norman Geisler's systematic theology way back, I always appreciated how when you're reading and you think, yeah, but I wonder if he's going to talk about this, because I'm thinking right now that the skeptic could say this, and then you get to the bottom of the page and boom, there it is. And that's such a great feeling, and you're reading a good author, and I felt like that's what you were describing just then.
Yeah, and so in 2 days again, I'm going to be interviewing him. So if you want to learn more about that, feel free to join and check it out. So here's the full book. Let me see if I can raise all of these up. I don't know if you're going to be able to see them all. So here's all 12 books. Let me see if I can back up here. All 12 books that you can win if you sign up to become a patron. And again, the point of this is to get the final amount and to get to 100% funded so that I can do this ministry full time. And let me give you a quick update on where I'm at, because I just launched this on yesterday. And as of right now, let me actually pull up Patreon, because I don't know if people have already signed up from watching this right now. So let me just pull it up here and run some of the numbers. Feel free to fill this space with anything you want to say, Braxton.
Yeah, well, one thing is it's really difficult sometimes specifically for Christian ministries to talk about money, because it can seem uncomfortable. But you know what? There are great things that God wants to do through ministries like this, and it takes resources. And Cameron's not trying to get rich, but God can use what you do, and you can be a part of. So when Cameron is out here talking with Josh Rasmussen or something, and I got an email the other night. I should share this, Cameron. I got an email the other night from a guy. I won't give his name, but he said, I was watching Josh Rasmussen on Capturing Christianity, and I was so moved by it that I went and checked out everything I could find by Josh Rasmussen on YouTube. And he said, I believe now. I think I'm convinced that Christianity is true, but I felt like I could talk to you about it, to me. And so he had reached out to me, and I don't know if he's committed to Christ yet, but that speaks to how God is using a channel that seems so abstract and theoretical and doesn't seem like, we're giving altar calls or anything here, but God is using it in a way with people where other stuff, it might not be the way that God wants to communicate to them. And when you give to something like what Cameron's trying to do here, you're a part of that. You're a part of how God's using a ministry like this. And it's not about you or me getting credit, but it is about us recognizing that everything we have is ultimately His. It's not just 10% of our money. Everything we have, the shirt on our back, the breath in our lungs, and everything we have between now and eternity, it's all His. And when you accept that and submit to that and sacrifice by giving to a ministry that's worthwhile, like Capturing Christianity, it's just such a good feeling to know that you're part of that.
Wow. That's awesome. That guy. I think you told me that in text or on the phone one day. But that's incredible. I remember posting about asking for testimonials from people who have been impacted from capturing Christianity, and the testimonies that started to flood in were just incredible. Like one guy, and you can actually see all the testimonies if you go to my website, capturingchristianity.com. You can see the list. I put them up. But one guy was actually saved from depression and suicide. Like he was contemplating suicide, and then when he found out about capturing Christianity and watched some of the interviews and watched some of the content, he became a believer again, and he sort of saved his life. It's incredible that God is using this ministry to do something like that, something that I never intended for it to do. I've never thought that I would build a ministry so that I could try to save people from committing suicide, but that's one way that God is using this ministry. It's incredible. But yeah, I really appreciate what you said there about this. This is very important. And when you support a ministry like this, you are part of it. You are like literally your hand is sort of in the pot in making this happen. And so, yeah, that is a big reason to want to do that. All of us can rise together, come together, and basically get stuff done that God wants done. So yeah, so if you want to enter into the draw and you want to potentially win these 12 books, then head over to patreon.com/capturingchristianity. You can become a patron. Oh, I was actually going to give you an update on where I'm at. So I'm at, I just ran the numbers. I'm at 94%. So I was at 88% right before I started this yesterday, and I'm already at 94%. And so once we get to 100%, I'm going to close it down, and we're going to send these 12 books off to somebody. So the sooner that we get this closed out to 100% funded, then the sooner I can send these books off. Oh, and I should also mention that I'm going to send these books to someone that's in the U.S. If you're outside of the U.S. and you win, I will still contact you and see if you want to help cover shipping, because shipping 12 heavy books like this is going to cost a little bit of money. But if you're interested in willing to help out with those costs, then I would be happy to ship it over to you. So that's the only thing there. So if you're in the U.S., I'll ship it to you for free. But if you're outside of the U.S., then I just need you to help cover some of the costs there. So yeah, I think that covers pretty much everything that I wanted to cover in this hangout. And yeah, I guess that's going to do it, because I wanted to see if we could open up to Q&A, but I think we're just sort of out of time. I didn't expect it to really take this long. But thank you guys for watching.
You didn't expect me to talk so much. That's probably what it was.
I didn't expect you to interrupt me as often as you did. No, I didn't.
Yeah.
So thanks, Braxton. Well, anyways, yeah. So again, check out Braxton's YouTube channel. Check out his debate with Matt Dillahunty, and check out all the amazing stuff that he's doing over at his channel. I can't stress enough how important his work is. It's incredible. Like, one of my favorite videos that he's ever done is a recent video that he did on 2 highly evidenced miracles. And if you want to watch that video, check out his YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe to his channel as well. I want his channel to blow up, sort of like mine is starting to grow and everything. So yeah, well, thanks for joining, and we will see you guys later. So peace.